Chapter 2. The Sister. The maiden felt the warmth of the sunlight as Ishin hummed from the kitchen. Although she was a high god, Ishin had a preference for making tea the mortal way. Fire, leaves and thyme, she would often say, were the only true way to make a good tea. The maiden had to agree, especially since it gave her a few more moments with the high god. With a deft efficiency, Ishin prepared 2 cups and then strode over to her living room. There were 2 couches and a chair. Ishin chose to sit on the couch nearest to the window with the maiden. She passed the woman the cup and saucer with a smile. The tea was as good as ever, the maiden determined. Happily, she sat drinking it with Ishin in silence. It was their small ritual during their meetings. First, there was tea, and then there were words. Today, like any other day, they would exchange meaningless small talk. At least the maiden considered it meaningless. "How did you sleep? Are you enjoying the weather?" The maiden answered that today with, "Of course you made it." That elicited a laugh. Other common topics were animals they saw, goings-on with the war, stories from refugees, or discussions on clouds. These words often were like clouds. Soft and without substance, they floated in the air between the 2 beings. To a passerby, they were simply window dressing to the ambience. Again, though, the maiden didn't mind this. These word clouds were essential padding for the matters that came after. The words that flowed now were easy and full of joy. She got to hear Ishin laugh while Ishin learned more about how the maiden viewed the world. Sometimes, the maiden determined, the meaning of the words was less important than the feelings they allowed to grow. Empty words still had purpose because of the feeling they could be filled with by others. "This was the first day with your new name. Were things any better?" The maiden held back a sigh. Ishin had determined that the time for empty words was over. The time had come for heavy words laden with purpose. In response, the maiden allowed herself a sip of her tea. "They still recognized me even though I didn't use my name." "Yeah, we knew that would happen," Ishin said. "But nobody new recognized you. Yarrow called me by my old name a few times and then some people yelled at me." Ishin slid closer and wrapped the maiden into a side hug. Her clothing was dove feather soft while also being perfectly warm. The maiden faintly smiled as she was pulled into the embrace. Heavy words felt less heavy here. "Normalcy will come, darling," Ishin said. "I promise you that in time they'll meet the real you. The past is still within sight of them. It will take time to fade." "How long must I wait?" "Mortals," Ishin began, "have strange memories. Some things they can remember for hundreds of years, passed from generation to generation, and recall details like it was yesterday. Other memories die like quick-bloom lilacs, here one day and then gone the next like they never existed." "This sounds like a riddle," the maiden said, as she leaned her head against Ishin's shoulder. "You will outlive them all," Ishin replied. "No matter how long it takes, you will remain at the end of it free. I am sure of that. Can't you make them forget?" "No, that would be wrong," Ishin said nobly. She brushed a few strands of snow-white hair away from her young face. "I am a constant of the universe and do not interfere with the free will of mortals." The maiden opened her mouth to speak, but Ishin laid a finger across her lips. "I do not interfere in large ways." "Can you interfere for me?" the maiden asked. "Not in a big way. I don't care about my name, not really, although I am glad that I was given it." She took a breath to settle herself. There were so many thoughts that her lips were trying to voice all at once. "Ishin, I want to know where I belong in Rose Hollow. Should I be out there with them or in here? Sometimes I even think Rose Hollow isn't the place for me, that I'm just as much a prisoner here as Nicholas." "Darling, you are not a prisoner here," Ishin began. She would have spoken more, but the maiden cut her off. "They yell at me and glare at me and throw stones at me constantly. There is no end in sight. What if I was so terrible that I live in their memories for thousands of years? Sometimes I fear that I cannot bear another day in this place. It is like all the anger in this city is funneled to me and I hate it. They curse me every day. The worst thing is Ishin. I don't know why they despise me." She turned toward Ishin, whose face had fallen into a look of great sadness. Her blue eyes held a sympathetic gleam mixed with some other emotion that the maiden could not grasp. "What did I do to them?" the maiden asked. "A lot of things." "What exactly?" "Maiden, I don't think it matters as much as you think it does," Ishin said. "You should not consider it your past. That history belongs to something other than you. Your story begins in that crater with me. That's where your tale deserves to begin because everything else before that moment was out of your control. I would not ascribe the sins of a parent to their child, so don't attempt to stitch the past of another onto your current self." They all do it. That doesn't make it correct, Ishin said. They are fearful people with complex lives who cannot be expected to grasp the nuances of the situation. I don't grasp the nuances, the maiden said. Don't you see, Ishin? I'm lost here. We all are at some level. But I've got nothing. Not only don't I have a past, but no present, and at this rate, no future. Maiden, tell me where I belong, what I should be doing. Her breath was coming quicker now, and the maiden realized that she was clutching the pillows on the couch. Some of the fabric had begun to tear as feathers began to pop out. Ishin gently moved her hands over, placed them on the maiden's, and gave them a reassuring squeeze. I don't know where you belong, although I'd like to figure it out with you. What I do know is this. You are spectacular in your own way. Your presence is a gift to this world that I would not like to live without. I shall do all I can to help you find peace. Can peace be found for a monster like me? Firstly, Ishin said sharply, you are not a monster. Secondly, peace comes from belonging. Even the worst of things, which I am not saying you are, can find a space where they can thrive. To find this place is to find the missing part of a mortal. You see, mortals are incomplete things. Your essence cannot exist unconnected to other phenomena in your environment. Most need concepts like space, time, atmosphere, and the rest to get on with their existence. A simple bacterium requires these things. The strange trade-off, though, is that with complexity comes the greater need to become reliant on others' phenomena. Many animals need sustenance, water, and oxygen to aid in their continued existence. Those beings with sentience need even more phenomena to truly belong. One of those things is community. In this community, they find other valuable phenomena that are also required, yet community often acts as a gateway for such phenomena. Even from a young age, many mortals are brought into a community. Their first moments are spent surrounded by clerics, nurses, family, and other members of their community. They might not know it, but the universe provides them with this essential building block from the beginning. Now, their community can shrink or be lost, but they at least have had a taste of it. This is like water in a desert for many. But for you, Maiden, the world is different. Your community was not provided to you from the start. You are still building it as you go, and that is a far harder path. Most mortals are tribalistic and resent those that are not like to them. Your mountain is higher than most because you are like nobody else. So I belong nowhere? No, Ishin said definitively. It means you belong everywhere. There are no intrinsic things that separate you from others. You are unique, and unique things belong anywhere they please. There can be no barriers erected by other communities to keep you out. That is to your advantage. They still try to keep me out. But they do not know you, Ishin replied. They are wary of something else that seems vaguely familiar. We just need to show them that you are different. A unique thing that has stumbled into the world ready to be accepted. You've got a new name, and that is a great start. This is the first day of a new chapter in your already small book. Look at it this way, Maiden. This is chapter 2 of an epic book that will span millennia. Do not write it off because the beginning isn't to your liking. You'll have to use another analogy, the maiden said. I don't remember having ever read a book. Wait, you can read, right? Yes, but I have always been able to read, the maiden responded. Books haven't been high on my priority list, especially since I haven't been allowed in the library. Haven't been? Okay, we will change that, Ishin said. I will alert everyone in the... Ishin's blue eyes began to look at something in the distance. The maiden guessed that she was seeing far past the buildings of Rose Hollow. That was a look the maiden recognized, one that told her Ishin was seeing things that only high gods could comprehend. What's wrong? An attack on a mining town on the Prime Ring, Ishin said as she began to rise. I'm sorry. We must cut this conversation short. Their numbers are overwhelming. There isn't much time. Wait, the maiden said. Let me help. There's no... I've had training. I'm stronger than most other people, and you said it yourself. Their numbers are overwhelming. Ishin took a moment to pause. For a high god, the maiden knew that was an eternity. They operated on incomprehensible scales and processed information in great waves of consciousness. Ishin's hand clenched and unclenched thrice as she looked into the distance. Fine, Ishin said. Don't be bisected and save lives. Not being bisected was proving to be a greater challenge than previously anticipated. The saving lives bit was also proving a challenge if the maiden was being honest. The town of Etemir was on fire, swarming with the soldiers of the Titans, and was about to plunge into the cave systems below. Etemir was a town on the Prime Ring which lay at the centre of a fertile valley. It had once been a home to lumberjacks, as it grew around the largest forest that was in this area. But the forest, like so many others in this region, had been obliterated during the early stages of the war. That left the trees desolate husks of their former selves, which lay scattered across the landscape like scars left by the world. After the war had taken all other industries, Etemir had begun to focus its attention below. At the behest of the high gods, the inhabitants had begun to excavate great crystal mines. These had become quite successful and brought great wealth and attention to the area. This also had the added benefit of making it a target for the Titans. These crystal mines, Ishin had reasoned, were the root cause of the Titans' attack on Etemir. The crystals were useful for all sorts of weapons, machines, and rituals. That must have been why the Titans called down great stones from the heavens onto Etemir. Their impacts sent shockwaves barreling through the streets, throwing brick and person alike, as the entire town shook. As the maiden stumbled against the side of a half-destroyed stable, she felt the ground below her quake again. The impacts were enough to destabilize the earth above the tunnels. Any impact, the maiden realized, could be the one that sent Etemir and its people falling to their doom. Warriors of the gods, some angels, and some regular humanoids fought amongst the chaos. Their weapons flashed as they hacked through the monstrous creatures that stalked the burning streets. Voices cried above the roar of explosions to move toward the priory. There the soldiers had created an escape portal, which led to Rose Hollow. Of course, the problem was getting people there. The maiden shouted too, although she often found that she couldn't hear her own voice over the roar. She tried to grab people, moving them toward the priory whose steeple rose above the smoke, but their eyes were glassy. The apocalyptic clash around them caused their minds to shut down. In the face of the destruction of everything a person has known, it can be hard to save oneself. That's why the maiden was here. Through the smoke she ran, avoiding the fire and monsters until she found the sound that had found her ears. A mother, human by the looks of her and no more than 20, stood glassy-eyed with a newborn child swaddled in her arms in the threshold of a collapsing doorway. There were bodies around them. The maiden did not care to glance at them. Instead, she yanked the woman out of the doorway of what once was a house. It collapsed moments after ejecting ash and dust into the air around the maiden. The crying of the baby let the maiden know that the two were still alive. With a cry of exertion, she began to half lead and half drag the shell-shocked woman through the streets. Each step through the wreckage and flames seemed to be heralded by another tremor from below. Ahead of the maiden, an angel's body was flung through the smoke at her feet. They had once been beautiful. The angel had 2 grey wings that sprouted from their back, but now they were torn ragged, blood-caked feathers and skin as the maiden stepped over them. Their once perfect white hair had mixed with the blood and mud beneath them. The body of an angel did not decompose, and so a quick thought shot across the maiden's mind. One of the poor thing getting buried beneath viscera and mud. A vision where the angel was forgotten and the miracle of nature lay in an unmarked grave, forever tarnished. The maiden knew angels often died. Their role in the war was vital as they fought along the front lines of the Prime Ring. Unlike the maiden, they had experience fighting titans. Ishin often said that angels were some of the best warriors in the universe. Yet just because it was their role, that did not mean the sight of their death didn't make the maiden's stomach churn. She might have gotten lost in her thoughts if she hadn't heard the telltale rattle of bones ahead. The killer of the angel proceeded to emerge through the smoke. A necrodactus. The snake-like beast was made of bones animated with titanic magic. The magic allowed the creature to move its body, which reached over 60 feet in length. 60 feet of bone that was tougher than steel. 60 feet of powerful serrations that would shear flesh at a touch. 60 feet of a creature that could rend whole squads of angels from the face of the rings. At the front of this body sat a massive humanoid skull. Despite having no tendons or muscles, the thing moved its jaws, revealed jagged teeth that resembled broken glass. These teeth, the maiden noted, were stained gold with angelic blood. Yet as she looked upon this thing, she momentarily entered a coughing fit. The horrid stink of the necrodactus had reached her nose. It stunk of rotting meat, sulphur, and a rancid sweetness that could only be described as decay. The smell was so overwhelming at this distance that it caused the maiden's eyes to water. Behind her, the maiden heard the mother and child coughing from the smell as well. The skeletal body clacked as the necrodactus' eyeless skull fixated on the maiden, the mother, and the crying child. As the creature reared back, the maiden threw the innocents to the side. Just in time, too, as the tail of the Necrodactylus slammed down on her shoulders. She felt the air wheeze out of her lungs as her form slammed into the quaking street. Dust, rocks, and blood were sent flying into the air around the point of impact. The beast creaked something like a chuckle, the maiden presumed, and refocused its attention on the mother and child. Yet it did not see the maiden's hand reach out. She wrapped her fingers around the tail of the beast and then pulled with all her might. Her gargantuan strength surprised the beast as the maiden hurled it into a burning building. The 60-foot-long monster collided with burning drywall and wood. As it slammed into the already weakened foundations, the remains of the burning house gave way. A shriek escaped the Necrodactylus as it was buried beneath the rubble. It was still alive beneath the collapsed building. The maiden saw its form thrashing from within the smoke, but her mission was not to kill. She took up the hand of the woman as they resumed their trek through the burning remains of Etemir. At some point, the maiden wasn't sure when the mother and child passed out from the lack of oxygen. The maiden didn't mind. It was almost easier to carry them through the city. Their meek forms felt so frail in her arms as she ran toward the priory. Despite the chaos around them, the two were able to sleep peacefully. As the world's horrors were unleashed around them, they were able to find refuge in their dreams. Their breathing returned to normal as the maiden approached the priory, which stood on a small hill to the west of Etemir. Here, above the flames, the ash and smoke weren't as thick. The maiden could see the peaceful face of the young woman. She was beautiful, young, and with a child. How terrible a tragedy it would have been for her to die here. Stumbling toward the priory, the maiden saw the portal. A few dozen soldiers had created a perimeter, their weapons keeping back the forces of the Titans, allowing the civilians to flee through. The portal itself was composed of a ritual circle drawn on the ground and overlaid with silver dust. From the circle sprung a brilliant blue column of magic that spiraled into the sky. Into this column, the people of Etemir dove, springing into the salvation it promised as they left behind their old lives. More tremors signaled the beginning of the end as the southern end of the town tumbled into the crystal mines below. The rest of Etemir would be along shortly. With a renewed purpose, the maiden pushed onto the portal. She kicked back a strange beast with 6 limbs and the face of a red-feathered bird. It squawked as it tumbled back into a group of oncoming monsters, tripping them up and causing a mass of limbs and teeth to form. As the maiden made her way past the soldiers, one decided to take a cheap shot. They stabbed her through the chest cleanly. Their spear exited out her back with one of her organs skewered on the end of it. The maiden glared at the soldier, whose face had gone pale but decided to keep moving. Although it hurt, the wound would be gone by morning, and she could deal with only one lung until then. The maiden attempted to focus all her attention on the portal, but something caught her eye. Through the smoke in the distance, something immense began to bear down on the town. It came in the shape of a woman with great claws. These claws, which sprouted from her fingers like fingernails, produced a high-pitched squealing as they moved through the air. The maiden watched as one of them touched a nearby house. At that slight touch, the stone began to chip and disintegrate as the shingles on the roof became black sludge. Within mere seconds, the structure had been reduced to dust and sludge. Some of this dust swirled around the woman's red dress. The material wasn't made out of a normal fabric, but something that resembled raw muscle. It flexed and contracted as the woman walked as if it was a part of her body itself. Around the waist of this dress was a thick corset made from something like blackened bones. At this distance, the maiden couldn't be sure, but she thought she saw that they moved too. She didn't think the bones needed to bind the dress to the porcelain white flesh of the woman. Despite the woman being some distance away, the maiden could read the expression on her face. There was a smile. Not the warm, inviting type the maiden often saw, but an excited smile that came from a person that knew that they were in complete control. There was a hunger too as her dark red eyes took in the chaos that was the town. Her gaze fell upon the soldiers and monsters, then to the buildings and the people within. The maiden watched as golden tendrils of energy began to unfurl from the back of the woman. They created a web of limbs made of light that surrounded this titanic monster. Something about the creature was oddly familiar to the maiden. How it walked, attacked, and manipulated the world around it. The maiden saw it pass by a burning group of trees, only for the trees to shrivel and die. Great oaks, decades old, growing to resemble mere husks of themselves in seconds. Entropy, the maiden breathed out. She was transfixed on the creature. How she knew its name was unknown to her, but it was undoubtable. that she knew the monster that charged toward the priory. Shouts from the soldiers were what finally drew the maiden's gaze away from entropy. They had all begun to run, abandoning their positions as they made a mad dash toward the portal. Their voices carried over the clamour to the maiden's ears. "She's manifesting," one said. 3 seconds and close it," barked another. "Ishin will kill it!" A glimmer of light began to descend from the sky above Etemir. The maiden watched it sparkle for a moment or two. Ishin was beginning to draw her full power into reality. The manifestation of a high god was an awe-inspiring sight. However, not one meant for even her. Etemir and all things around it would be destroyed by her presence. The maiden did not know how one so peaceful could cause so much destruction by their very existence. The maiden hefted the slumbering woman and child in her arms and stepped through the portal as Ishin manifested in the skies of Etemir. All was destroyed.